Welcome, my name is Christina Scandelius. I'm going to present a paper today written by myself and Geraldine Cohen. We are based at Brunel Business School in Uxbridge in the UK. The paper I'm going to present is talking about the typical challenges facing organizations who wish to implement a sustainability strategy or organizations who already have a sustainability strategy that they wish to further optimize. We're going to present a framework, a communications framework, on how to use communications to stimulate collaboration and co-creation with various stakeholders. The work that we have done is based on a case study in the food industry. Most organizations today recognize the importance of an holistic approach to sustainability. It's not enough to just consider sustainability within their own organization, but sustainability initiatives need to extend to include the wider value chain and needs to consider all aspects of the life cycle of a product. This can be quite complex as it requires companies to have quite a broad knowledge and understanding on how its product is used, and also the organization needs to collaborate with the quite a different number and different types of stakeholders. However, a sustainability strategy needs to be well anchored within the own organization before it can extend to include also stakeholders outside the organization. And our paper today will focus on the internal stakeholders to first, as a first step, anchor sustainability work in their own organization. Our research aim is to explore how communications can be used as a strategic tool to resolve possible conflict of interest between internal stakeholders and to rather stimulate collaboration and co-creation. And as I mentioned previously, the context for our research has been the food and drinks value chain. We have based our research on three theoretical streams. First of all, we have the internal stakeholder management, with researchers like Shapiro, Crittenden et al., etc., who have looked into typical conflict areas between internal functions in a company. Specifically, they talk about conflicts between marketing and manufacturing. They talk about the underlying drivers for these conflicts and how to use different tools to overcome these problems. One of the tools that they all recognize is the use of communications. Communications is also further discussed in the internal marketing literature. We have different authors here have taken different perspectives and different angles on how to use internal marketing and how and why it should be used. But they all agree on the importance of using communication to create stakeholder commitment, both internal first and then external stakeholder commitment. Literature on strategic ambiguity, which was introduced to the business literature by Eisenberg in 1984, suggests the use of ambiguous statements and keywords to stimulate collaboration and innovation when a goal is unclear and when the stakeholder situation is complex. The definition of strategic ambiguity, here by Davenport and Leach, is to on purpose use ambiguous statements and keywords to create space for various stakeholders to have their own interpretation of the statement, and also which will allow them to take their response so they can find their own way to achieve the goal. Davenport and Leach are further suggesting to use strategic ambiguity when a goal is not fully clear, when stakeholders are not compliant, or when the achievement of the objective requires various stakeholders to collaborate. And all these situations are very similar to a situation of collaboration towards a sustainability initiative. We conducted research into communications around strategic ambiguity and communications overall in the food and drinks value chain. We conducted 17 semi-structured interviews with both food and drink brands, including Unilever, Nestle, Coca-Cola Enterprise, etc., but also with retailers, including Marks & Spencer, Morrison's, Ahold. These interviews lasted anything from 40 minutes to 2 hours. The interviewees were all sustainability managers or communication managers on either vice president or director's level. Based on these interviews, we suggest the following framework, sustainability communications framework. We have two different drivers here. So on the one hand, we have the complexity of objectives and or stakeholders. A low complexity here means that either the stakeholders are a very homogeneous group with similar opinions, or that the objectives are very clear and it's very clear how to reach the objective. On the other hand, we have organizational capability of life cycle thinking. And a developing company here is a company that's quite recently started the journey towards sustainability. We have well-established companies. That describes a company who have already, for quite some time, worked towards sustainability strategy, and who already works together with the extended stakeholder or value chain to reach sustainability progress. So we suggest here that the communication to use to the various stakeholders, so we're talking about internal stakeholders, depends on these two factors. So for instance, if we, as an example, look at the first square, and we look at the developing companies who recently started the sustainability journey. Such a company who has a high complexity of objectives or stakeholders, it is suggested that they should use ambiguous value statements to encourage commitment and facilitate change. So this is again going back to the definition here, to allow the various stakeholders to find their own way to reach the goal, because the goal obviously would be complex, it's a high complexity. It's better to allow the various stakeholders to find their own way to achieve this. It is important, however, that this is backed up with strong leadership and resources and capability to do this change. An example here is from our interview with Unilever. When they started their sustainability journey many years ago, their senior management announced a statement where they said, "We wish to operate this business sustainably." And this is obviously a very ambiguous statement, but it allows the various functions to translate it into something that would fit their function. And they could, so the operations would use this and translate it into maybe some new statement to operate sustainably within the operations perspective, and marketing would do the same from a marketing perspective. If we move on to the next square, we're still looking at a developing company, but we look here at the situation when the complexity is low. In this instance, clear specific communication is suggested. If the objective or stakeholder situation is very specific, it is not suggested to use ambiguous communications. An example here is from one retailer that we interviewed, and they had a target. It was announced to reduce in-store food waste by X% by 2011. So they had a very specific goal. The stakeholders all agreed on this, and it was fairly straightforward on how to achieve this goal. If we move on to an organization with a well-established capability of life cycle thinking, and if we look at the square with a high complexity, in this situation, an ambiguous statement to encourage innovation and co-creation is suggested. And an example here comes from Coca-Cola Enterprise, who already well established within life cycle thinking. They have a slogan that they use both internally and externally, which says, "Deliver for today, inspire for tomorrow." The stakeholders, the internal stakeholders within the Coca-Cola enterprise are already well established within life cycle thinking. They have the capabilities, and this ambiguous statement will encourage them to further challenge existing objectives and to find new ways to operate more sustainably. If we move on to the final square, for the well-established organization where the complexity is low, it is again suggested not to use ambiguous statements on the specific goal, but to rather use specific communications on concrete targets. However, in a well-established company, a company who already are well aware of life cycle thinking and has that well integrated into the business processes, practices, it's also useful, even when the objective is of low complexity, to have ambiguous values and general statements to stimulate further innovation and optimization. This is to further challenge the existing specific goals to come up with possibly new, better goals or new approaches. An example here is from Ahold. They, for example, would set a target: reduce carbon dioxide by square meter of sales area by 20% in our operations by 2015 against our 2008 baseline of 433 kilograms. So this is a target that is clear and it's importantly achievable. But at the same time, they state, "We will ensure that each operating company has a comprehensive waste management program in place by the end of 2011. And this is much more vague, as they still need to work out what the target should be and how to measure it. But by an ambiguous statement like this, they allow the employees to explore various options without being too restricted. So as conclusions, we have found that internal marketing is an important tool to get commitment and collaboration from internal stakeholders for a sustainability strategy, which is important to anchor internally, and then it is possible for the organization to also extend its sustainability thinking beyond their own organization. We presented a framework suggesting different communications strategies based on the complexity of objectives and stakeholders and on the capabilities of the organization. And we suggest that this framework is of practical value as it provides organizations with tools to stimulate collaboration and co-creation with internal stakeholders. And in addition, it adds to the academic literature as it extends knowledge in sustainability stakeholder management and internal marketing communications. And this is our reference list. So I thank you very much for listening to our presentation. Thank you and bye.